Imagine standing at the edge of a two-lane road somewhere in the American Southwest. The asphalt stretches out ahead of you until it dissolves into a shimmering heat haze. On one side, a neon sign flickers above a diner that hasn't changed since 1954. On the other, a rusted gas pump leans like an old man who's been standing too long. The wind carries dust and distance, and for a moment, you feel the entire weight of American history beneath your feet. That road has a name. And if you know anything about the soul of this country, you already know it. Route 66. This is the story of a ribbon of pavement that became far more than a road. It became a dream, a lifeline, a legend. And then, almost without warning, it became a ghost. To understand how Route 66 was born, you have to go back to the early 20th century, when America was falling in love with the automobile. In 1910, there were roughly 180,000 cars registered across the entire United States. A decade later, that number had exploded to 17 million. Americans were buying cars as fast as manufacturers could build them, but there was one enormous problem: there was almost nowhere decent to drive them. The roads of that era were, to put it generously, a disaster. Most were unpaved dirt tracks that turned to rivers of mud after a rainstorm. Long-distance travel by automobile was less of a journey and more of an adventure in suffering. That problem needed solving, and the man who stepped forward to solve it was a Tulsa businessman and road advocate named Cyrus Avery. Avery had a vision of a continuous, well-maintained highway that would connect the industrial heartland of the Midwest to the sun-baked promise of the Pacific coast. He lobbied tirelessly, argued endlessly, and eventually convinced the federal government that a national highway network was not just desirable but necessary. His efforts paid off on November 11, 1926, when Route 66 was officially designated as a federal highway, running 2,400 miles from Chicago, Illinois, all the way to Santa Monica, California. Cyrus Avery would later be remembered, and rightly so, as the father of Route 66. The early years of the highway were rough. Large stretches remained unpaved, and the road wound through small towns, farmland, and desert terrain that could test any vehicle and any driver. But the work continued, mile by mile, and by the late 1930s, Route 66 was fully paved from end to end. It was a genuine engineering achievement, and it arrived at exactly the right moment, because America was about to need it desperately. The 1930s brought one of the darkest chapters in American history, the Great Depression. Banks failed, crops withered, and families across the country found themselves with nothing. Nowhere was the devastation more complete than in the southern plains states, where years of drought and poor farming practices had turned the fertile soil into dust. Massive storms rolled across Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Colorado, blackening the sky and burying farms under drifts of blowing earth. The region became known as the Dust Bowl, and the people who lived there had no choice but to leave. More than 200,000 migrants, most of them from Oklahoma and the surrounding states, packed their families and their few remaining possessions into whatever vehicles they could find and pointed themselves west. Route 66 was their road. It was the way out, the way forward, the thread of hope that ran through a landscape of despair. They drove it in overloaded trucks and rattling jalopies, sleeping on the roadside, stretching their last few dollars as far as they could go. They called it the Mother Road, a name that stuck with it forever. That phrase, the Mother Road, came from the pen of John Steinbeck, whose 1939 novel The Grapes of Wrath followed the fictional Joad family on exactly this journey. Steinbeck's writing brought the reality of the Dust Bowl migration to readers across the country, and his portrayal of Route 66 as a road of both suffering and resilience gave the highway a literary immortality that no amount of advertising could have manufactured. The road was no longer just asphalt. It was American mythology, but the story of Route 66 was never a simple one, and there is a chapter of its history that deserves to be told with honesty and care. For Black Americans traveling the highway during the era of segregation, Route 66 was a road fraught with danger. Across the country, and particularly in certain towns along the route, African American travelers faced the threat of discrimination, violence, and places known as sundown towns, communities where Black people were expected to be gone before dark, by social pressure or by force. A wrong turn, a wrong stop, or simply the wrong moment could turn a road trip into a life-threatening situation. To navigate this reality, many Black travelers turned to a publication called the Negro Motorist Green Book, compiled by a Harlem postal worker named Victor H. Green. First published in 1936, the Green Book was an annual travel guide that listed hotels, restaurants, beauty parlors, and service stations across the country that were welcoming to Black customers. It was an indispensable resource, and for many families hitting the road, it was as essential to pack as a spare tire. The Green Book is a reminder that the open road was not equally open to everyone, and that the full story of Route 66 includes the voices and experiences of people who had to fight simply for the right to travel safely. When World War II ended and the soldiers came home, America entered a period of optimism and prosperity that felt almost surreal after the hardships of the previous 2 decades. The economy boomed, families grew, and the automobile was firmly at the center of American life. Route 66 became something entirely new, a vacation highway. Middle-class families loaded up their station wagons and hit the road, heading for the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, the beaches of California, and eventually a brand new park in Anaheim called Disneyland. To serve these travelers, an extraordinary culture of roadside businesses sprang up along the highway. Motels with glowing neon signs. Diners with chrome counter stools and jukeboxes loaded with the latest hits. Curio shops selling turquoise jewelry and genuine fake arrowheads. And then there were the spectacles, the giant statues, the outlandish architecture, the roadside attractions designed to slow a car down and pull a family off the highway and through a front door. This was the golden age of Route 66, and it was glorious in all its kitschy, sun-drenched, neon-lit glory. The highway had become not just a road but a destination in its own right, and then it started to die. Ironically, the very popularity that had made Route 66 so beloved was also what killed it. By the 1950s, the highway was struggling under the weight of its own success. Traffic was relentless. The two-lane road was a bottleneck, prone to congestion and accidents, unable to handle the volume of cars that a prosperous America was putting on the road. Something had to change. The inspiration came from an unlikely source. During World War II, President Dwight Eisenhower had been deeply impressed by Germany's Autobahn system, wide, high-speed highways that allowed troops and equipment to move across the country with remarkable efficiency. Eisenhower believed that America needed something similar, both for national defense and for economic growth. In 1956, he signed the Federal Aid Highway Act into law, launching the construction of the Interstate Highway System, a nationwide network of multi-lane, limited-access freeways that would bypass the small towns, the traffic lights, and the two-lane bottlenecks of roads like Route 66. The interstates were faster and safer, there was no denying that. But they were also impersonal. They routed around communities instead of through them, and for the small towns along Route 66 that had built their entire economies on passing traffic, the interstates were nothing short of a death sentence. One by one, as new sections of Interstate 40 and the other replacement highways opened, the towns along the old road fell quiet. Diners closed. Motels boarded up their windows. Gas stations sat empty with pumps rusting in the sun. The process took 3 decades, but the outcome was inevitable. On June 27, 1985, Route 66 was officially decommissioned and removed from the U.S. highway system. The mother road was gone, or was it? Because here is the remarkable thing about Route 66, it refused to stay dead. Today, roughly 85% of the original highway still exists in some form, maintained as state or local roads across 8 states. And people come from around the world to drive it. They come for the history, the nostalgia, and the sense that somewhere out on that old road, they might find something the interstates simply cannot offer, a connection to a version of America that moved a little slower and looked a little harder at the world it was passing through. The surviving roadside attractions have become pilgrimage sites for those who make the journey. In Illinois, a towering muffler man, one of those enormous fiberglass statues that once decorated roadsides across the country, still stands as a monument to the roadside kitsch of a bygone era. In Missouri, travelers stop to gawk at the world's second-largest rocking chair, which raises a smile precisely because someone, somewhere, was absolutely determined to claim that title. In Oklahoma, the whale of Catoosa, a giant blue whale rising out of a small pond, has been delighting passing motorists since the 1970s and shows no sign of stopping. And then there is Cadillac Ranch, just outside Amarillo, Texas, where 10 Cadillac cars from the 1940s through the 1960s have been half buried nose first in a field, their tail fins pointing skyward like the spines of some chrome dinosaur. The installation is open to everyone, and visitors are not just permitted but actively encouraged to bring a can of spray paint and add their mark to the already heavily layered surfaces. It is chaotic and strange and completely unforgettable, which is, when you think about it, a perfect summary of Route 66 itself. The rise and fall of Route 66 is, in the end, a story about America at full speed. It is a story about the hunger for movement and freedom, about the communities that grew up around the act of passing through, about the people who needed a road to survive and the people who turned that same road into a celebration of life. It is a story about progress and what we lose when we pursue it, and about the stubborn human instinct to remember what has been left behind. The highway that Cyrus Avery fought so hard to build outlasted every prediction made about it. It outlasted the Dust Bowl that gave it its greatest meaning. It outlasted the interstates that were supposed to replace it. And somewhere out there right now, on a stretch of cracked asphalt running through a sun-bleached landscape, someone is driving it for the first time, windows down, music up, chasing something they probably couldn't put into words. That is what Route 66 has always been for.